I'm Malia White, real-life Bosun and cast member on Bravo's Below Deck Med. Working in my industry can be very interesting. These are my stories. As you'll find out, my world is a total ship show.
Welcome back to Total Ship Show. I'm Malia White.
I'm Amanda Logan.
And today we have a very special guest, dear to my heart. He is a good friend from Hawaii back in the day, and his name is Dustin. Hey, Dustin.
Hey, aloha, everybody.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm actually in Kaneohe, Hawaii right now, and yeah, excited to be on your show.
Okay, so Dustin, before we actually get started, I have to tell you, I was in Hawaii in January, and I matched with you on Bumble. But I was leaving the next day, so I didn't say anything. But I had looked up, your website and read all your story and everything. And then Malia was like, "Oh, I have this friend who would be really good for the podcast." And she was telling me about you, and I'm like, "Okay, I definitely matched with that guy on Bumble, in January."
Dustin, luckily for you, she was flying out the next day.
Missed my chance. Dang it.
You dodged a red flag. I'm just kidding.
How can you say that?
Kidding, obviously. So yeah, where should we dive in? So first of all, Dustin and I met in Hawaii. I think it's kind of blurry, Dustin, because I only remember, we went sailing. I just remember lots of pineapple jalapeno margaritas, which you taught us how to make. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. We hung out a bit because I was dating your roommate, so
yep.
I was at the house quite a bit.
I remember that.
And so, yep, and yeah, it was really fun, and yeah, I always enjoyed hanging out with you. That sailing trip, I think, was blurry for everybody. Everyone was pretty smashed on that trip.
Yeah, whoops, not my brightest mariner moment. Okay, and so to back up, Dustin has a pretty, I would say now it's an incredible story, but also a pretty devastating one in the beginning. But you've turned it around to make it something amazing. Do you want to share that with us, Dustin?
Yeah, so back in 2008, I was hit by a drunk driver, and my arm flew about 50 feet from the scene of the accident, and I was nearly killed. They amputated my foot the next day, and I had to make a phone call to save my own life. The guy who hit me kept going. He drove about another 600 meters from the scene of the accident. And so I took my phone out of my pocket and called 911. And actually paused for a second to think about it, because I knew my arm was missing and I knew my foot was badly damaged. And I was like, if I actually make this call, I'm going to have to live as, disabled person. And so it took me a minute to actually work up the courage to make the call to save my own life. But after that, my health insurance company sued me for almost $500,000 because the accident wasn't my fault. Blue Cross decided it wasn't their responsibility to pay. It was the person who hit me responsibility to pay. And since Hawaii's a no-fault state, he only had $25,000 in coverage. So Blue Cross put a $440,000 lien on me. And then about 5 years, 4.5, 5 years after the accident, I completed a bankruptcy. I completed paying the IRS debt. And this is probably right about when I met you, Malia.
Yeah.
And then I decided, I found this list of people who had set records sailing around the world alone. I was like, well, there's no double amputee on that list. I'm going to do that. And so I started saving money, and I read books and watched YouTube videos to learn how to sail. And I bought a $12,000 boat, and I took off.
Oh my gosh.
Dustin, ever since I've met you, your spirit and just the way that you've taken something that I guess if it happened to me or pretty much anyone I know probably would have been a lot different outcome, But for you, you've not let it slow you down a bit. And I guess going back to the accident, wasn't it, was he ever found, because it's Hawaii, so did he actually get jail time or?
Yeah, he did. He,
okay.
The wheel came off his truck when he hit me, so he wasn't that far away.
Okay.
And so they found him, and he got sentenced to felony negligent injury, and he did about a year in jail, but then he went back in for something else.
And like you were saying, the pause to call 911.
Yeah.
That's such a decision of okay, how strong is my will to live in this situation?
So, and then before the accident, I know you were living in Hawaii, and tell us a little bit about what you were doing before the accident.
Before the accident, I owned a carpet cleaning business, and I had a commercial fishing boat. And then I also worked at the Sheraton part-time as a waiter and bartender. And that's how I learned to make the pineapple jalapeno margaritas. And yeah, so I had a really comfortable life. I had a nice house and a Mercedes and a motorcycle and a fishing boat. And yeah, I was really, really doing pretty well in Hawaii. And it was just that one moment when he hit me. Suddenly I was $500,000 in debt and just on this completely different path.
Wow.
And yeah, also just to make it clear, Dustin, you were riding a motorcycle that night, right?
Yeah, it was a RC51 Honda.
Yeah. And then as I know you today, Dustin's a huge scuba diver, like water, ocean, like sailor, well, now a sailor. We'll get to that. But so yeah, I know that you've told me before, but I think you said, you know, if you couldn't dive again, then you didn't really want to live, basically.
I was curious if I'd be able to dive again at the time of the accident. And it took a while because I was on blood thinners. And so the doctor was like, well, there's not really any data on how pressure affects someone on blood thinners. And so I had to wait till I was off of those. But I actually went scuba diving before I even got my prosthetic legs. So
Wow.
I went and did a manta ray dive one night when, you know, before I even was able to walk again.
That's amazing. I mean, I think I'd be the same way. I'd be like, take me diving.
Yeah,
I don't
that
care
is
about walking,
so
take me
amazing.
diving.
So you made the decision, you were looking up like world records and you had made the decision that that you wanted to sail around the world, and then you said that you read like books to learn how to sail.
I know, this makes us look so bad. Justin's like over here like, all right, let me just figure out how to sail.
I
And
mean,
I'm
that
like,
to me, I'm like, how did you do that? How did you like practice on a sailboat? Like, what was that process? Did you raise money? Like, what was then your next step?
So yeah, I didn't have any sailing experience, and I didn't even know anyone that knew how to sail. So I didn't even have someone that I could just ask questions about it. And so I got a bunch of books to learn how to sail conceptually. But the problem was is I didn't know a lot of the vocabulary either. I didn't know what a halyard or a sheet was or whatever. And so I started like YouTubing halyard, sheet, reef, whatever. And so that way I could see what they were doing and actually kind of learn the vocabulary as well. And so for about maybe 6 months, I was working on the boat and kind of learning these things conceptually. And then there came a time where I actually had to go out and see if I knew how to sail. And the first trip I had as a captain of the boat was with my friend Brandon and 2 other guys who didn't know how to sail. And we sailed across the Aonui Channel to Lanai, which is one of the most dangerous places in the Pacific Ocean.
yeah.
And I mean, most of the sailors here that I've met, like they wouldn't even consider taking their boat in or island. And it was the first time I'd ever sailed that I did it.
Wow, so you're very
love
out
this.
like adventurous, but also a little nuts.
He's adrenaline seeking for sure. Adrenaline seeking. That's insane. And how was that first trip? Like, did you instantly love it, or were you like, oh, I guess I can sail?
It was pretty awful. The trip across the channel, all the reefing lines were in the water, the halyards were in the water. We caught a mahi-mahi, like once it really started getting rough, and it wrapped around the wind vane, so I wasn't able to use the self-steering either. So I had my foot on the tiller for like 8 hours.
Oh
All the
my
guys were down
gosh.
below sick, like comatose. And so by the time we got to the other side of the channel, I was like, hey, someone come up here. And it was actually John came up. And he grabbed the tiller because I had to go use the bathroom. And
God.
I, like, my leg had cramped up. And then we had to get the fish out of the water. The fish was still dragging behind the boat. We dragged the fish for like 25 miles. And we got the fish on board. And yeah, and then it calmed down in the lee of Maui. So it started to, you know, the guys came back to life and we were able to start sailing. So I was able to get a break.
Oh my gosh. And then did you have to sail back?
Yeah, so we stopped in Lanai for one night, and then we went to Oahu the next day. And this was for my friend Jeremy's bachelor party. So all of us went partying in Oahu that night, and then Jeremy and John flew back. And then me and Brandon sailed over to Kaneohe, which was also a really tough trip. And then ended up coming back through the Molokai Channel, stopped in Molokai and Maui, and then back across the Aonui back to Hawaii.
Wow.
And then I think it was
Yeah.
I think it was probably between then and when I left that I went sailing with you and John that day and Tanya. And so there was about a month I was back in Hawaii before leaving, and we fixed up the boat and had that benefit concert at Lulu's.
Yeah.
And then I left. The first time I'd ever sailed alone by myself, like, was leaving the Big Island to Palmyra, which is a 1,000-mile trip.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, so your goal that you set out to do, why don't you explain that, Dustin, like what your actual goal was to achieve?
So my goal was to be the first double amputee to sail around the world alone, which I've now done. So I accomplished that.
Yeah.
And
That's
I'll actually
amazing.
be in the next Guinness book too. They're going to do a little media bit
Yay.
about it next month.
Oh, that's
my
awesome.
gosh, this
Okay.
is amazing.
So I'm really curious what your thought was when you had decided I want to be the first double amputee to sail around the world, and then your first trip with your buddies was like, sounds like it was a nightmare. Like, what was your thought after that? Were you like, all right, I got through my first trip, I'm ready to go, or were you like, oh my gosh, this is crazy?
Yeah, it was definitely a bit scary. And also leaving the Hawaii community behind, because after my accident, I had this horrific debt, and there was so many horrible things that happened during those years, but the Kona community was always behind me. And so leaving Hawaii to go off on my own again, and I knew nothing about the sailing community or the yachting community. And honestly, like I grew up a bit of a poor kid, so like I never considered going to a yacht club. You know, I thought they were going to be a bunch of snobs.
Yeah.
But it turns out like the sailing community like completely accepted me as well. You know, I just went up and I accepted an award at the Annapolis Yacht Club, and I went up to New York Yacht Club on my East Coast trip. And, you know, I've become part of this community now, but I never expected that. So just leaving that community in Hawaii was probably the most difficult thing. But now I have this whole new community as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the sailing community, I mean, it's such a diverse group of people, and it's all over the world. So that's a pretty cool community to be a part of, especially with your accomplishment.
Yeah.
And so from what we've said, like from what I've talked to you about, your boat was not fitted at all. You didn't have it changed at all, correct?
No, so my first boat was a 1968 Allberg 35, and it was not outfitted in any way. I mean, it was still like a really old boat, so even like a newer boat would have been much easier to sail. And that boat ended up in Thailand, and by the time I got to Thailand, it was completely falling apart because I was out of money, and you know, I had no way to financially fix up the boat. And that's when I did a crowdfunding. So I started GoFundMe and a Patreon and a website, and I started doing media interviews because before that I didn't do any media.
Okay.
And I raised enough money on the crowdfunding to buy the new boat.
Wow.
And since then I've continued the crowdfunding, and it's taken me all the way till today. So it's what I've been living on for the past 5 years.
And we have to ask, so what was the hardest part about sailing for you by yourself?
Reefing the mainsail is probably the hardest thing to do at sea, because whenever you do it, it's rough and you have to get up to the mast. And you know, most people have two hands, so they hang onto the boat with one hand and then use the other hand to do what they need to do. And so for me, I just have to wedge myself in somewhere and clip off and use one hand and use my teeth and stuff.
And did you have any close calls while you were gone?
Not really. I got hit by a storm in American Samoa, and it was just like maybe 200 miles from American Samoa. And it was about 2 days of 50 knots of wind, and the deck seam on the boat split. So I took on a lot of water, and I didn't realize where the hole was. And so like when I put my foot down in the cockpit, I was like ankle deep in water. I was like, oh, great, I'm sinking. And my first thought was like, I'm gonna have to end up in the life raft. But I pulled the floorboards up, and all the water went down to the bilge and pumped out. And because the water was coming from up above, so it wasn't, the bilge wasn't even full. And so I was able to find where the leak was, and I stuffed a bunch of t-shirts and plastic bags in it. And
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it slowed the leak enough to where the bilge could keep up.
So what was your route when you first started?
So I did a year and a half in the South Pacific. I did Hawaii, Palmyra, Kiribati, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea. And then I went through the Torres Strait, did Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And then across the Indian Ocean, I did Sri Lanka, Chagos, Madagascar, Mozambique, South Africa. So I went around the Cape of Good Hope, and then sailed up to the Caribbean. And when COVID hit, I was in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so I ended up sailing up to the Northeast United States. So I did Rhode Island, New York, and then sailed back down to the Caribbean when things were starting to open again. And then I went through the Panama Canal, Galapagos, Marquesas, and Hawaii.
Do you have any just like story of like a specific group of people that you met that you just had like a wonderful time with? Like one night that you're like, that was such a wonderful night with those people?
Good question.
one of my favorite spots and people was in Hurrdat, which is in the Banks group of Vanuatu. And there's a really small tribe. They had no internet, there's no satellite, no cell phones. And their only communication with the outside world is like a supply ship that comes in every 6 months or so.
Wow.
And I was the first boat they'd seen in over a year, like private boat. So the chief paddled out his canoe as soon as I anchored. His son, his name was Jean-Claude, showed me all over the island. And, I'd have dinner with them every night. And one night I actually brought all the kids to the boat to watch movies because none of them had ever seen a movie before.
Wow.
And so I had like 20 kids on the back of my boat and watching the Avengers on my laptop. And I didn't think about it, but the next day I went to shore and the adults were like, "Oh, all the kids had nightmares about the green monster." And I was like, "Oh, no." Like, but they had never seen violence before. Like an American kid that's 10 years old would watch the Avengers no problem, but these little island kids were so innocent.
Wow.
And when I left, when I left, they were all crying and like saying goodbye, and I was like, "I've only been here a week." It's like my family doesn't even cry when I leave. It's
Yeah.
So for you personally, when you were sailing, did you also try to stay out of touch a bit, or like were you trying to, kind of be off the grid and use? Because like when we go to sea, it's very, for us, it can be very mentally clearing.
Yeah, I mean, I was forcibly out of touch. A lot of the
Yeah.
places I went to, like I didn't have a satellite phone or anything. So
Dustin, you
everywhere
didn't have a sat phone?
no.
What?
And so no, after I got to Fiji, I got a Garmin InReach. So I was able to get weather predictions and stuff on that. And that's why I didn't see the storm coming in American Samoa, because I didn't even have any weather updates on the boat.
Oh my gosh, don't tell me this. That's insane. So you were just like, all right, let's go. No weather, no sat phone. Like, what'll happen will happen.
You were doing it like the settlers were.
Well, like a true sailor.
Yeah.
I'm so impressed.
Yeah.
What an incredible, like you've probably gotten to experience things that some of us will never get to do in our lifetime. Like, that's such an incredible journey.
I think so. Yeah, it's a unique experience showing up by yourself. And then also me as a double amputee, like a lot of these small villages, they don't have hospitals or antibiotics or anything. Nobody would ever survive an injury such as this. So seeing me show up by myself on a sailboat is like a unicorn or something they wouldn't even think was possible. And so I always get this amazing warm welcome, and I spend a lot of time with the locals, where most sailors come in and take some pictures and then go back to the boat and have drinks and dinner. And I'll usually stay on shore and have dinner with the local people and, experience their culture. And I go out spearfishing a lot. So usually any of the locals that go spearfishing, I go spearfishing with them. And
That's awesome. So do you keep in touch with a lot of people that you did meet on that trip?
yeah, as many as I can. Almost everybody's on Facebook nowadays. So
It's true.
yeah, so all the sailors I met along the way are on my Facebook, and a few like the places that had internet, I've kept connections with those people.
Where was the best food?
That's tough.
I know.
Indonesia is probably the one I'm missing the most. The Padang food, they had like jackfruit and just lots of like interesting curries and stuff. And like the other foods you could pretty much get here. Like you could find Thai food and most stuff you could find here, but you don't really see Padang food anywhere, which is something that I really enjoyed. Some of the meats in South Africa too, like ostrich and the different elks and stuff, they were really good.
Yeah. So how was sailing around South Africa? Because obviously that's one of the most treacherous areas in the world as well.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And it's much harder than Cape Horn. Like Cape Horn's a bit rougher and well known, but it's not very far to get around Cape Horn. It's only about 80 miles. But to go from Anchorage to Anchorage, or like marina to marina going around the Cape, it's like 500 miles between spots. So there's that revolving low goes through there. So pretty much every 3 days there's really bad weather, and it's almost impossible to make those jumps in 3 days. And so it makes it really tricky.
Did you experience some pretty bad weather down there?
I saw 45 knots. It was the roughest I saw on the trip around, but it was, I picked good weather windows, and it took a while. I spent like 2 weeks in Durban, and
nice.
I spent a week in Port Elizabeth. And then from Port Elizabeth, I got a good weather window, and I went all the way around to Hot Bay.
Nice. Okay.
So were there certain destinations that you like stayed, put your sailboat, parked it there, and stayed and went like more inland and explored while you were there? Did you stay pretty much like right along the coast, like truly on the coast the entire time?
No, I stayed quite a bit. I was in Indonesia for 10 months. I spent a year in Thailand and Malaysia. And so my dad lives in Thailand, as Malia knows. She visited him.
I was going to say, yeah, I saw your dad in Thailand. I had a beer with Dustin's dad in Thailand.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I got to take my dad sailing to Malaysia and back a few times. And yeah, so I spent a lot of time. I stopped in 36 countries. And so in the 7.5 years I was away, maybe about 10 or 11 months I was actually at sea. So the rest of the time I was pretty much on anchor.
Yeah. And did you have friends or anything that would come and meet you and do like this leg with you?
Yeah.
So I couldn't take anyone on a trip that was like towards my goal, because then I wouldn't be sailing around the world alone.
Oh, right. Okay.
But I'd have friends come visit, and then I would just have to bring them back to where I picked them up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
That's so incredible, Dustin. So would you now consider yourself a sailor?
Yeah, I think I could.
He
I
better.
think I have to now.
You better. That's so awesome.
So what's the goal now? So will you stay on dry land for a while?
No, I'm actually taking a job up in Rhode Island. So I'm going to captain a 78-foot sailboat for this season, and then possibly bring it to the Caribbean for the winter. And yeah, and then see where it goes from there. The owner's really nice guy, and I talked to him about possibly doing the Northwest Passage on his boat, and he's receptive to the idea. So, and the Northwest Passage is at the top of my bucket list now.
So you're going to be a captain for a private family, so you're kind of joining the yachting industry?
Kind of, yeah. Don't tell anybody.
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. And then, so you'll be a captain, and then they'll like take it down to the Bahamas and stuff for now?
Yeah,
and then...
so just run it around New England for the summer, and then I'll get it ready to cruise, because it's been, just like a weekend boat. So probably do some solar power and set up the water maker and things for cruising. And then by wintertime, bring it down to the Caribbean.
Jeez, all of this from like, did you ever see your life going this way? Like being...
I didn't expect this. I didn't expect like really to be accepted in the community. And I was really surprised. The first time I did a yacht delivery was from Fiji to New Zealand, which is a really tough trip. This guy with like a $500,000 catamaran was like, "Hey, can you take my boat to New Zealand?" I was like, "You realize I just started sailing like 2 months ago?" I was like very clear about that. He's like, "I saw you come in here on anchor." He's like, "You'll be fine." And yeah, then after that, I've done 5 or 6 deliveries now. The last 3 deliveries I did were on multi-million-dollar boats.
So what does a delivery mean? Does that mean that you're like just literally bringing the sailboat from point A to point B to get it to wherever the owner wants it to be?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So like the last one I did was from Rhode Island down to Grenada in the Caribbean. And I've done one across the Pacific, a couple in, a couple down in Fiji and Australia.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's
so
cool.
What captain's license do you hold now?
I don't have one.
What?
Yeah, I'll probably get one. I have enough sea time that the insurance accepts me as a captain for deliveries. And unless I'm paying customers on the boat, it's not required.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, of course, because it's not commercial, is it? It's just...
Yeah. And so, yeah, I will probably get one. I was actually thinking while I'm up in Rhode Island, I'll probably get my captain's license.
I love that you've gone around the world and now you're like, yeah, maybe I'll get a captain's license.
Yeah, he showed you up.
Hell yeah, he has. He's showed up pretty much everyone.
Yeah, literally everyone. That's amazing.
Such a cool story, Dustin.
Well, thank you.
Well, yeah, we won't keep you. I know you're in beautiful Hawaii. And yeah, so just so everyone can reach out and those who are moved by your story that can donate or just follow your journey, is it still The Single-Handed Sailor?
Yep. My Instagram and Facebook are both The Single-Handed Sailor, and my website's thesinglehandedsailor.com.
And you can get some cool merch on his website and support Dustin in any way that we can.
And what about the crowdfunding? Is there a link on your website or?
Yeah, there's links on the website. There's just like a buy me a beer icon or something, and yeah, if you want to stick down, I'm gonna the crowdfunding is gonna keep me going for the next month, and after that, once I start working, I'm gonna put it on hold.
Okay.
Okay,
Gotcha.
cool. Well, we'll definitely be throwing that up on the Total Ship Show website so everyone can join in and watch the adventures as you continue to be a captain, because you're, I mean, you're more of a captain than anyone I know.
That is so amazing.
Anyways, much love, Dustin. Enjoy Hawaii. I missed it a lot, and thank you so much for doing this. I miss you.
Cheers. Thank you.